So Kyle asked me to put this presentation together. I do have just a short series of slides. What I'd like to do is just tell a couple of quick stories about some of the features in the Nightlights display this year and talk some about the behind the scenes efforts that we go to put on this display every single year here at Tower Hill. So Nightlights, and I'm going to share my screen. Nightlights is our full lights display, and it has certainly gone through a lot of changes through the years. We try really hard to make the display non-denominational. We want to make sure it's a display that appeals to a wide range of people from all backgrounds. And so we really focus primarily on putting together colorful light displays, especially in the outdoor landscapes. Tower Hill has seen a lot of growth in the last couple of years. And whereas in the past, we may have been able to do a lot more sort of fine level detail work in the interior and the inside the buildings. We have so many people visiting us now that it's a challenge for us in our spaces to have those big displays indoors. So we really try to focus on the outdoor display and really try to put on some what I think are really impressive and really beautiful outdoor displays for people to enjoy. I'm happy to announce that Nightlights is officially sold out as of yesterday, so we're pleased with all the support that we get. It's clear that this is something that really resonates with people. We know that our members and their friends and loved ones really enjoy this every year. It's an annual holiday tradition for a lot of people. We love that. We love how much you all love Nightlights, and we're always happy to see you at this time of the year. And luckily, the weather's been pretty cooperative this year so far. So what I thought I'd do is talk about a couple of the features throughout the garden and just go into a little bit of background on how they're how they're put together. And I mostly want to talk about the staff who are involved and the volunteers who are involved in putting these displays on. This is truly a year-round effort. As soon as Nightlights finishes for the year, we start taking the lights down. We get that question a lot. Do you leave the lights on all year? And no, we don't. We really try as much as possible to take all the lights down every single year at the conclusion of Nightlights so that we don't have an impact on the important plants in our collection throughout the garden. So we really create this from scratch every single year. And starting just at the conclusion of Nightlights, we take all the lights down. We work with a tremendous team of volunteers who helps us to go through the lights, test them, make sure they're still working, wrap them up, package them, and put them into storage for the summer. And so it's truly a year-round effort, not only from a physical standpoint of dealing with the lights, whether it's unpackaging them when they come in, ordering them, putting them out in the garden, or taking them down, but it's also a lot of planning. So my team in the horticulture department meets all throughout the year. We usually take a break sometime in January, February, and pick up planning pretty heavily starting in March every single year. And we try to respond to the things that we thought worked really well in the display from the previous years, and the things that maybe didn't work as well as we had hoped. One of those things that we feel like has worked really well and has been a very popular feature in Nightlights for the last several years is what we call the rainbow tunnel. And this is the brainchild of April Tugas, who has been on our staff for the past 5 or 6 years. April is a gardener in the outdoor gardens, and she's really taken it upon herself to become a great expert in all things lights. We work with very specialized commercial grade lighting. This is not the type of lights that you can just buy at your local hardware store or one of the big box stores. The lights that we order are commercial grade. They're really high quality, and they're all low voltage. So they work with transformers, and we're able to string a lot of lights together and work with a lot of different colors. And so April's really fantastic. She oftentimes serves as a great resource for other staff and helping them to figure out exactly what specialized adapters they might need, what transformers they might need, what extensions they might need. She's just really great at that, and she's a really talented designer, especially when it comes to night lights. And the rainbow tunnel is something that she did several years ago in the former Systematic garden, which is now the Nadeau Garden. It's become such a fan favorite that we usually try to bring it back every single year. This year we made the rainbow tunnel quite a bit larger than it's been in the past, and we moved the location into the lawn garden. And here in the foreground, you can see an image of the structure as it was taking shape up in our nursery here at Tower Hill before we were finalized with all the plans for how it would be put together. And this one came together pretty quickly right at the very end. We had some structural challenges. We ended up having to add sort of a superstructure to hold it all together above it. But the colors work great together. This is a very, very popular spot for people taking selfies. It's definitely something that people look for, so it's featured pretty prominently on the map, and definitely something that we plan to do every single year for the foreseeable future. Another one of our really popular pieces of nightlights are these plastic bottle flowers. And these are one of the things in the nightlights display that takes the most time. They're pretty labor intensive to put these together. We do work with recycled plastic bottles to put all these lights together, and we do have to create new ones every year. The plastic gets tired. We can recycle and repurpose a lot of them from year to year, but we definitely have to dispose of them after a few years. But we're slowly amassing a pretty large number of these flowers. But they are all individual plastic bottles. We put out a call for plastic bottles to staff and volunteers a few times a year, and we just get bags and bags of clean plastic bottles, anywhere up to 1 liter. We have some staff that really like 1 liter seltzer bottles, so we get a lot of those. We're really trying to think about how we can use essentially a trash product and turn it into something beautiful. And I can't tell you the genesis of the plastic bottle flowers. We've been doing them for so long. I don't know that anyone really knows where the original design came from any longer at this point. But each one of these flowers is cut and painted either by a staff member or a volunteer, and it's really a team effort. This year we had a group of Girl Scouts help to create some of these bottle flowers. We work with volunteers all throughout the year, and oftentimes on rainy days in the middle of July or August, you'll find our volunteers down cutting bottles and painting them, getting ready for that year's display. And I'm sure we'll get some questions about how they're assembled. They're really pretty simple, but they're always a fan favorite. People tend to love the plastic bottle flowers.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah, Kyle, go ahead.
Your audio cut for 1 second, and just reiterating that you said we remake them, a lot of them every year, correct?
Yeah, we definitely keep them from year to year, but they get tired. They get the plastic rips. They get a little worse for wear. So we do end up making new ones every single year, and we're always trying to add to the display as well. It gets bigger and bigger every year. A new feature this year. This is in an area of the garden that you're probably familiar with. This is the vegetable garden that you can see in the distance. And this is a fairly new path that we put in that takes you through the vegetable garden into the lawn garden. And Dawn Davies, who's our horticulture manager, put this display together this year. Because the vegetable garden doesn't really have any permanent plant material in it, when we do light displays here, we have to build structures or use structures in order to display lights. And Dawn this year had this idea of doing this little cottage scene. And so the structure that you see in the distance that looks like a little house is actually a shade structure that we use during the summer to protect some of our plants in the permanent collection from too much sunlight. And this year we painted the frame black and wrapped the whole entire thing in lights, and even went so far as to hang a couple of actual wooden window sashes and an old wooden door to really bring that story home. and create this little structure. And it's just a beautiful little scene. I know that as kids come around the corner and they see this, and adults as well, everyone loves to see the little house off in the distance with the reindeer and the colored sort of tree forms. And we on the staff have come to calling this the Ginger Bright House. We really like that name, and I'm pretty sure that this will find a home in future Nightlights displays as well. A new feature this year, and this is another one of April Tugas's designs, are these beautiful lanterns. One of the things that we really wanted to try to play with this year is the idea of pattern and color and shadow. And April had the idea of taking, these are actually, they're sort of decorative fence panels. They're made of plastic, and she had the idea of creating these large scale lanterns. Some of these are over 6 feet tall. And she started working on these over the summer, assembling them, putting them together. And we're not always just thinking about that year's display. We're also thinking about future years' displays. And so April was sort of brilliant in putting this design together so that the entire thing is collapsible. It can be broken down, flattened out, and then we can store it. You can imagine that storage is at a premium here with all the lights that we have to stockpile every single winter, every single summer, I guess. And so April was really forward thinking in assembling these in a way that they could be flattened down and stored and repurposed and reused year after year. And I just love the patterns that they create on the brick and the lawn. We've had a little bit of snow since this display was created. And the lights really shine well in the snow. So, that little bit of snow on the lawn next to these lanterns just makes them really pop. And I love how they work. This is a great example of teamwork. April put together the overall concept, and then she worked with our land steward, a guy named Robert Graham, who's really mechanically inclined and pretty good at figuring out how to create someone's vision when they're not exactly sure how to do it. He was really instrumental in figuring out how to hang the light from the top of the lantern so that it could display well. These are color changing LED lights. So as you walk around the lawn garden, there are about 25 of them all throughout the lawn. And as you walk around the lawn garden, it's really interesting to see the different patterns that are created and the different colors that are featured in those lanterns. During the planning process, we oftentimes look for inspiration, and like a lot of you, I'm sure, we look for inspiration online. We look for inspiration on Pinterest. We look for inspiration just searching for images and kind of tagging things and sharing things with each other. We have a team of about 8 to 10 people that are in the horticulture team that work primarily on coming up with the displays each year. And we have a few different Pinterest boards that we use to share ideas with each other. And we meet weekly for the most part throughout the year to go through our progress since the last meeting and also to sort of brainstorm ideas with each other. And a lot of times those brainstorms result in some pretty great results, like the lanterns that you saw in the last image. A feature that I was really happy with from the 2019 Nightlights display was what we call the cubic tunnel. And this was a collaboration between myself and Amy Nyman, who's our horticulture outreach manager. We had the idea of sort of repeating shapes, repeating circles, repeating triangles, going down Pliny's Alley, which is a pretty prominent spot in the garden. And we wanted to try to create something that would be really stunning from within the buildings and that would draw you down Pliny's Alley. Pliny's was open that year for night lights, and so we wanted to make sure that there was a really strong draw to bring you down that alley, and I feel like the cubic tunnel really worked very well. It's a series of rotating squares There are, I believe there's 10 of them altogether. And so as you walk down Pliny's Alley, you're walking through each of those squares, and they have this great sense of motion. Motion was the theme for 2019, and that was something that really worked very well for that theme. This year, Pliny's Alley had some pretty drastic changes. We built a boardwalk on Pliny's in advance of the construction of the Ramble, which is our new children's garden that's just to the north of Pliny's Alley. And so that gave us an opportunity to do something slightly different, and also to make this path a lot more accessible, so that more people could enjoy walking down the light display, not just viewing it from one angle, but walking down it as well. Before putting the boardwalk in, this area was a pretty muddy mess, and it was not very accessible. And so this year, with the advent of the boardwalk, we thought we would add a little bit to the feature, because we knew that a lot of people would be walking down it. And so we decided that this year we would create this little illusion, and have that cool white cubic tunnel going down one way, and then we would turn it into a rainbow heading back the other way. And what's been really fascinating about this one in particular is that most people who walk down the tunnel as they go from the building up toward the Ramble have no idea that there are colored lights on the other side of the frames. And when they exit the Ramble and they're leaving, it's really fun to hear people's comments. A lot of people say, wait a minute, those lights were white before, they change color? How does this work? And it's been a really fun optical illusion, and it's fun to hear people's response to something that you thought about for a while and struggled in putting together, and then then to get to sort of reap the rewards of how people react to it. It's been really interesting. And speaking of the road to the Ramble, the biggest introduction, or the biggest new feature in the Nightlights display this year is the Ramble itself. So the Ramble is a children's garden, or children and family garden, that's been under design for almost 10 years, or maybe just slightly more than 10 years. And we were finally able to break ground on it this year. The garden is still actually under construction. It's not quite finished yet, so it's only open in the evening. It's only open at night. And the light display here was the brainchild of Hunter Blanchard, who is a horticulturist in what we call the naturalistic gardens. Hunter put together, he really wanted to interpret sort of this galaxy feel with lots of these giant orbs. You can see these spheres. These are actually color changing spheres that are all programmed to go through a slow progression of color that matches the color story that Hunter was trying to tell here. Most of the colors that he worked with are sort of reds and purples, with some other additions mixed in. But this year we were really pleased to be able to open the Ramble for the first time for the Night Lights display, and I think it's been a great feature. People have really enjoyed it. There are almost, I think, 4 dozen of the spheres all throughout the garden, and they're pretty impactful. They definitely are pretty visually stunning. And the garden also features a lot of uplighting, and really just trying to highlight some of the cool features that are in this garden. This is the area that's known as the brush pile. So you can see the brush pile in the distance. It's a small tunnel that you can walk through. If you're an adult, you've got to crouch down a little bit. It's perfectly kid-sized, and we really wanted to try to make as much as we could of the features in the Ramble without a whole lot of knowledge about what it might actually look like. Because this was an ongoing construction project, and because the construction wasn't quite complete by the time we really needed to start to set up lights, as a team, we really had to figure out exactly what the light display was going to look like without the benefit of physical gardens. So most of the design that Hunter did, working in collaboration with other staff, was all conceptual on paper, because the garden wasn't built by the time we started putting this thing together. And I think the results really speak for themselves. People have been really thrilled with the display here. And the last thing I wanted to mention before I'll turn it over for questions is we know that this year was a challenge, just like last year. We actually canceled night lights for 2020 because of the pandemic. We knew that people were going to be less than comfortable indoors, and that we wanted to try to focus as much as possible on the outdoor experience. We, for the last several years, have had an indoor train display, and it usually moved around from one year to the next. It was always a very popular spot for kids and adults alike. But we knew that we didn't have the indoor space um, to make the train display something where people would feel comfortable standing in a group of people inside for for a period of time, especially with kids who are unvaccinated and that kind of thing. So we wanted to move the train display outdoors, and this was the perfect location. This is the pavilion within Ramble, and we decided that we would put we would move the train display outdoors and put it under the pavilion. That meant we had a chance to go from a very small O-scale trains that we've used in the past, like you can see here in this image, to a much larger train. This is a G-scale train that we've featured here in the pavilion. So G-scale stands for garden scale. It's about 5 times as large as the old train display that we had in terms of the size of the locomotives and the box cars and everything. But it's been a really popular feature with people who visited this year. The train display is certainly something that kids look forward to, and knowing that we wanted to do it outdoors, I engaged a couple of volunteers who've worked with us in the past on trains who have a lot of expertise in putting these things together. And without their help, a gentleman named Rich Joyce and his partner, Rich Godfrey and his partner Tom Runstrom, without their help and their expertise, we wouldn't have been able to put this together. Nightlights is truly a group effort. In addition to all the decor, all the light design, we have a lights working group, which is a cross-departmental working group that focuses on every single detail of the display, from signage and parking to advertising and sponsorship, and it's really a garden-wide effort, an organization-wide effort. Every single person on staff is involved in Nightlights in some way, and many hours of staff time and volunteer time go into putting this display on every year, and I couldn't be more grateful for all that everyone does to put this display together. And the train display is just a small example of that. Rich and Tom helped us to figure out, what size tracks to order, which cars to order, which locomotives to order. Rich designed the table. He's an engineer, so he put together some pretty great schematic drawings for it. And then a longtime volunteer of ours named Frank Bissett actually built the table, put it together. And we just couldn't have done it without their help. And it's the same way every year. Like they say, it takes a village, and Nightlights is an example of that for sure. It takes a lot of effort, and we couldn't be more grateful for everything that everyone does. That's it for my slides. I'm be more than happy to answer any questions that people have. And Kyle, if you want to manage that. And
Yeah, I will can manage. We have a couple questions, but I want to start with one question because it's
Sure.
It's the question I've heard the most this year, and I can maybe have us both be spotlighted. Boom.
Sure.
Boom. Boom. The question we've gotten the most is, when do we start putting up lights? How long does it take to put up the lights is what I've heard the most. So
Yep. Yeah, that's a good question. So this year was a little bit different. We actually did a smaller display called Autumn Illuminated in the month of October. And we tried really hard to put lights out, like, for example, up lights on trees and that kind of thing that could work for both Autumn Illuminated and night lights. So this year we were definitely putting lights out in July, August, all throughout the month of September. for specifically for autumn illuminated, but also lights that we could then use for night lights as well. So yeah, I mean, most years we're putting up lights starting right around mid to end of August, really getting into it in early September. Taking breaks when we need for fall cleanup and bulb planting and that kind of thing. But the actual, the heavy lifting for night lights definitely happens throughout the month of November before we open on the Friday after Thanksgiving.
Yes, indeed. And I will ask the second question we hear quite often before I ask the other questions, which this is probably the hardest of all because we have so many different types of lights. But people are curious how many lights we have out there, and it's really hard to quantify. But
Yeah, I just don't have that answer, unfortunately. The hard thing is we add lights every single year. We take lights out of our inventory every single year. We're not really good with numbers. We're plant people. We're not always the best with numbers. So I don't have a good answer for that. It's definitely one of those things that I need to do in the future because it is one of the biggest questions we get. And I just, sort of like, I don't know, I remember growing up and driving past the McDonald's in my neighborhood and seeing the sign that said, 40 million served or whatever it was at the time. At some point, McDonald's just punted and said billions and billions served, right? They used to update that number and then it went away. So I would say just like McDonald's, there's billions and billions of lights out there, but I don't know the actual number.
maybe one day we'll hit 1 billion. All over the place. Great. A couple people had some technical questions.
Sure.
Let's see. Someone asked, I noticed you tape all of the light connections and not zip ties.
We definitely use a combination of zip ties and tape. So the bottle flowers, we really have to use tape just because of the nature of how those are attached. We use these small bamboo stakes that are used for like staking plants in your garden or staking plants growing in a greenhouse in a container. We use those, and there's just not really a good match between that stake and the top of the plastic bottle and the light that goes into it without using some electrical tape. So that definitely gets taped. A lot of our displays, the cubic tunnel, for example, that's got a lot of zip ties on it. Those are really holding the lights in place. So it depends. We use a pretty good combination of zip ties and tape. The commercial grade string lights that we use that I mentioned before that are low voltage, they have these great connectors. So there's a rubber washer, a male and female end that slide together, and then this twist lock that locks them in place. We don't have to tape those together because it comes from the manufacturer with a pretty good seal. But other lights we do have to tape together if they're not that style.
I think this question could be asked in two ways, so I'm going to ask you both. And the verbatim question is, are there permanent electrical wires underground to support the displays? We do have a lot of underground wiring already throughout the garden. And I would say probably the second part of this question is, do we have to create new electrical wiring underground when we think of like new displays?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. The garden, so Tower Hill was dedicated in the mid 80s. It's, just nearing 40 years old at this point as a garden. And when they were first building the garden, they certainly weren't thinking about a large-scale light display like we're doing now. And so over the course of the last 10, 15 years, as we've expanded the garden and added new garden areas, we've certainly added a lot of that infrastructure so that we could support these types of displays. But in some of the older gardens, we just don't have the infrastructure. The lawn garden, for example, most of the displays in the lawn garden are run off of like 3 or 4 outlets. And that's because there just isn't that much infrastructure to support a light display, because when it was built, we weren't thinking about these displays. We've had the benefit of doing a lot of construction the last couple of years. All the new garden areas, like the Ramble, for example, it's amazing how many utilities are in those places. There are plugs all over the place, lots of permanent path lighting, and really, with an eye toward being able to support this type of light display going forward in a more effective way, I'll say. And so some of those other areas, like the lawn, the oldest part of the garden, we are hoping to upgrade and planning to upgrade our infrastructure as we can. But it's tough. It's hard to add new underground utilities into an existing garden without having an impact on that garden. So it's a challenge every year. We get really good at figuring out how to run extension cords to places where we just don't have power. A lot of times when you see where we put in an arch, for example, sometimes that arch isn't just for aesthetics, just because we think it'd be great to have an arch in a spot. It's because it's the only way that we can get power from one side of the path to the next. And so, yeah, we get really creative with it, and I have a great team that's really, really sort of blossomed in thinking through all the logistical pieces of putting on a display in a challenging site like a garden that wasn't meant for it.
Yeah, definitely. And on the power note, somebody asked if we ever use generators.
So we avoid using generators as much as we possibly can. There have been a couple of cases where we've used generators, are just on the entry side. This is the first year that we're not using a gatehouse for checking people in, because we've expanded the parking lot. We've doubled the size of the parking lot. There's now 500 parking spaces out there, plenty of parking to accommodate all the people coming for night lights. All of our check-in is happening in the lobby inside the building, so we no longer have to have that gatehouse out there. And for the past several years, we had been using what we call the mobile gatehouse, which is a little tiny house on a trailer, with computer equipment in it and everything, and heat, and that usually had to be hooked up to a generator. But we definitely try not to use generators to run any of the lights. One exception is if there's a construction impact. So, for example, this year we have some construction going on down at the front entrance, down at the gate, and that construction cut the power, but we still want to try to illuminate the sign that's there to make it obvious for people where they need to turn to enter the garden. So we have been using a generator down there, but that's just a temporary thing. The power is actually going to get reconnected today, so we shouldn't have to use that generator for the rest of the season.
More on power, somebody asked if we have ever, or maybe in the future, we want to try to have any displays that are solar powered.
Yeah, actually, so in 2020, Tower Hill completed its 5-year strategic plan, and we talk a lot about sustainability in that plan. The garden is all on municipal power, so our power comes from the town of Boylston, the Boylston Light District, and we articulated in the strategic plan that we want to try to add as much on-site power generation and storage as we can. And we're moving forward with trying to get solar on our horticultural barn, which is our maintenance facility on the south end of the property. And so that's moving forward. We're really hoping to be able to do that work next year. That'll be our first, sort of toe dip into solar power. But I have really high hopes that we'll be able to put in a pretty large solar field to support our operation in the future. It gets a little challenging. One thing that you learn about the solar industry, anytime you try to take on a project like this, is that a lot of the equation for determining how to put in a solar installation is built on federal and state tax rebates. We're a nonprofit organization, so we're not eligible for those tax rebates. So that means the cost for us of doing a solar installation is quite a bit higher than it would be if we were a for-profit company. Um, and there are also some challenges for us because of that municipal light district. The municipal light district limits the amount of power that its customers can produce through solar. So we've got to work through some of those challenges before we can really implement any large-scale solar installations. But we really have high hopes that we'll be able to do that in the near future. But good question.
Yeah, that is a great question. And speaking on sustainability, and I think you hinted on this a little bit. And the verbatim question is, do you reuse the lights? And we reuse quite a fair amount until they've really kind of kicked the bucket.
Yeah, so the lights that we use are really high quality, commercial grade lights for the most part, not everything, but for the most part, most of our lights would fall into that category. The string lights that we use are generally good for about 3 to 5 years. And after 3 to 5 years, we really start to see a drop off in light quality. So the lights get a little dimmer. They're not quite as vibrant as they were. When they start to dim like that, we find other creative ways to use them. So for example, you can see, or I'm not sharing my screen, but I'll share my screen just for a second so you can see what I'm saying. If you look at this image, you can see that we're using string lights as a barricade. So that we're sort of signaling to the guests, don't go beyond this line. We oftentimes use those string lights to mark the edges of trails where it's not very obvious where people can go or shouldn't go. A lot of times we'll use some of our dimmer lights for those string lights. So we have crates of lights that are just dim, warm white LEDs that we can still get some use out of, but we wouldn't want to create we wouldn't want to create an entire display out of them because the light quality would be too variable. And we'll also find other ways, like if you come and visit as you're walking through the entry pavilion area, you'll see that we have some spheres that we've created ourselves, whether they're out of two like hanging basket metal wire forms stuck together, or grapevines or something like that. We'll oftentimes use some of those dim lights on those forms because the quality of the light doesn't matter quite as much when they're really concentrated in a sphere like that. So we do find creative ways to use those lights even after they start to diminish in quality. But we go to painstaking efforts to make sure that everything is taken down, everything is wrapped and stored and inventoried so that we know what we have to work with the next year. But we also spend a significant amount of money on lights. We want the display to get bigger and bigger and bigger every year. So we always will be adding more lights every year. We'll never get to a point where we stop purchasing lights because we always want to get bigger and outdo ourselves every year.
Yeah, and I think I'll kind of ask a final question. Maybe I'll make it a two-parter because you've hinted at one, and then I'll kind of ask the one I'm thinking of closing on. And that's kind of, are there any big ideas for some future, maybe next year, a couple 5 years down the road of maybe other gardens we hope to illuminate? And then I think adding on to that question that you can ask, because I think it's something that maybe people don't always notice, and I think it makes it a little bit fun if you come to Nightlights every year. And that's that we tried to do something different every year. And it's true that the horticulture team kind of gravitates to some overarching concepts or themes that they really try to all rally behind or connect with. And I think this year a big part of that was color. So maybe you can speak to both.
Yeah, so we try to have some kind of a working theme every year. This year our working theme is definitely color. It was all about it's been a pretty bleak couple of years. So we wanted to make sure that we had something that just really resonated with people, and we felt like color was going to be what did that. And so when you visit this year, you'll see just a lot of really fantastic use of color, and just really colorful displays all throughout. We just kind of wanted to throw color, throw caution to the wind and use a ton of color. And as far as and so we generally try to have that working theme. It's the first thing that we'll talk about when we start planning for the upcoming season, and that's where we'll start to put some of those Pinterest boards together and start to share ideas with each other about what we might want to try to do that upcoming year. But as far as future plans, the ramble was such a big addition this year. I love having that as part of the display. But because we weren't exactly sure what the timeline was going to be with construction, and because we didn't I'll say we didn't quite have the human resources to add that without sacrificing another part of the garden, if you will. We did not do anything in the Nadeau garden this year, the former systematic garden. So I think for next year, we'll probably look at trying to add the Nadeau garden back in, so that we have more of a display on the north end of the garden. But a lot of that's driven by accessibility. For right now, we're lighting basically the footprint that we have of accessible garden spaces. And so we try as much as possible to make sure that everything that we do is in a spot where people of all different types of abilities can get to it and can appreciate it and enjoy it. And then Nadeau Garden is a challenging spot because of the trail surface that's there. It's stone dust. It gets a little hard to deal with in winter conditions. So we'll more than likely add that next year. But beyond that, we haven't started planning for next year yet. But I know that my team is gonna want to push the envelope and make it bigger and better again, like they always do. And so I'm not sure. TBD. We'll see. We'll see what big ideas we have for expanding the display for next year when we start to get the planning over the winter.
I thought TBD might be your answer, not one to tip your hand. So,
I adopted that from one of your colleagues in education.
Yeah, you try not to do too much and then have to go back on that. So yeah, exactly. Well, I just want to reiterate that the horticulture team puts a huge amount of effort and time into the display every year. And at least for Tower Hill Botanic Garden, putting up the lights is not something we've outsourced. We do it internally, and it's amongst everything else we're doing, it's a big undertaking that we get all the lights up. So the horticulture does a great job. And then the Tower Hill team as a whole has, I think when night lights began, there were a lot of road bumps that Tower Hill learned from. And like you said, Mark, I think it's grown into a well-oiled machine that just happens every year. And then lastly, for those who are watching this live and then on the recording, Nightlights is a huge every year thing that supports the garden, and without everybody having interest in it and attending and wanting to support the garden, it's great that we can have your support, and you're kind of the last cog in the wheel to Nightlights making it happen every year. So we value and appreciate that support. And I guess one last question, Mark, and I don't really know the answer to this, and that's how many years we've done Nightlights. What year is this?
Well, yeah, so it started out as something called Holidays, and that was probably on the order of 15 to 20 years ago, and then it transitioned to Winter Reimagined, and then I think it was 2013, maybe 2014, that it changed to, no, sorry, Winter Reimagined was around 2013, 2014. Nightlights, the name Nightlights came to being in like 2017. But yeah, we've been doing it for probably 15 or 20 years. Like I said, it's changed a lot over the years. You know, in its current iteration, it's a pretty beautiful, I think, primarily outdoor display. Yeah, I hope that we're still doing it 20 years from now. It's a lot of fun to put on every year.
Well, you'll be lighting all the apple trees in the orchard 20 years.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, did I tip your hand? Did I tip a hand? Now we got to do that. Now it's got to happen 20 years from now. So
Gotta get a little bigger before we can. But one
right.
of these days, yeah.
Well, thank you, Mark, for your time today to give us a little
Sure.
behind the scenes info and answer some questions.